We now have a quorum. Our leader, Stephen Welch, will not be making today's meeting, so I will be chairing this meeting. So I'm going to need all the help I can get from Sue and from Terry. So bear with me as I try to glide through the agenda. So I'd like to call the meeting to order and take a roll call of those members present. Christy.
Aye.
Jill.
Here.
Peter.
Here.
And myself.
I guess here would have been more appropriate.
As is the case, we are being audio and visually recorded. So don't say anything like I did in the last meeting that you don't want to be memorialized forever on the internet. We have our agenda. I'd like to hear a motion to approve
Someone.
Second.
on your motion.
Aye.
Jill,
Aye.
Peter.
Aye.
Okay, moving on. No members of the public are present, so we will not have public comment at this time. I entertain a motion to approve the minutes that were distributed for October 20th and October 27th.
So moved.
Okay, do I have to do a roll call or can we?
You have to do a roll call.
Okay,
because you have
Christie?
somebody.
Aye.
Jill,
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, moving on to our first item. I see George Aronson is here to present the DPW's proposals. Welcome, George.
Thank you.
So if you're ready to go, we'd like to start with the landfill closure cost revisions.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, again, George Aronson. I'm a principal of Commonwealth Resource Management Corporation and a consultant to the town of Nantucket, working on solid waste matters and typically with matters involving the waste services agreement and how materials are handled at 188 Connecticut Road. The article in question, I'm looking at the agenda you set out, and I see that the project is called the Landfill Closure Phase 1 Supplemental Funding. Just to recap it, for those who are not familiar with the inactive portions of the landfill, it's essentially a triangular section of about 22 acres that is no longer accepting material. It was closed in 2008. I should say it stopped accepting waste in 2008. It's a large portion of the older part of the landfill. There is no bottom liner on that portion of the landfill, which means when the rain comes and filters through the waste and heads towards the groundwater, there's no way to intercept that material before it gets through the landmass. And under the current regulations of and law, the Commonwealth and regulations of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the landfill needs to be enclosed, and when it's inactive, especially if it doesn't have a liner. And in fact, this was the subject of a administrative consent order by the Mass Department of Environmental Protection going back to 1996, and it's been amended 8 times, most recently in 2014 when we did the landfill mining program, which some of you may be familiar with. So there's just a little history. At this point, the landfill mining program ended in 2019. The DEP had issued amended its consent order to say that the town needed to start closing the landfill within 6 months of the end of the mining program. And the town started that process, but the process was put on hold by the Mass DEP. Okay, and in part of the reason is because it's not clear how PFAS containing material will be handled. There are no specific standards that apply to some of the materials that would be handled at the landfill. And the DEP is in this holding mode while it waits to set those standards. Meanwhile, 3 years have gone by and the town is waiting for DEP action on its application, which again, the town is legally obligated to start this process in 2019, and being held back by the DP's failure to act on the town's application to move forward and request to move forward. The DEP could change its mind at any time. And again, this is an administrative consent order, so that if the town is not ready to move forward when the DEP acts, one hopes there would be reasonable accommodation to the delay, but the DEP does have authority to fine the town for unreasonable delays if it doesn't respond, even though the town has been waiting for 3 years and responded appropriately to the original consent order amendment in 2019. So that's a little background. So I would like to be able to tell you that we know when the landfill will be closed. We know what it's going to cost, and we know how we're going to procure it when it's going to start. I can't do that with any certainty until we have more information from the DEP on what the requirements will be for the closure. And so we're in this holding pattern while we try to figure out what the cost will be and when it's going to happen. Okay, to this point, the town has addressed this in a prior town meeting. Some of you may be familiar with that. At the annual town meeting in 2020, Article 14, the town approved $14 million with authorization to borrow that amount for the closure of phase 1 of the landfill. At that time, that was the hope of what it would cost. We've learned over the past 2 years a couple of things. First of all, costs keep going up. Second of all, there are a few stockpiles of material at the landfill site that will need to be addressed as part of the landfill closure that weren't really accounted for at the time that estimate was put together. So recently, the town hired Western and Sampson engineers to do an updated estimate of the landfill closure cost. And we've also worked with Waste Options, who's the contract operating the landfill and the other portions of the landfill, to try to get a meeting in the minds of what this is going to look like. If you take into account all the contingencies that you have to, or you prudently would have to take into account, the number is coming around $19 million. So that's the reason why the request is at this point to put in place authorization for an additional $5 million above the $14 million that was originally authorized for borrowing in the 2020 town meeting. So then the hope is that the $14 million already authorized plus another $5 million would make the town ready to proceed with the closure, given that the DP doesn't necessarily have to give the town a lot of notice to require the town to proceed with the closure process. Okay, so that's the background. That's why $5 million. I should say that we're continuing to work with Weston and Sampson and West Options, because when you're spending $19 million, there ought to be a way to find a way to reduce contingencies, save some money, do something, address or go back to the DP and ask for relief on some of the requirements for closure, etc. And so we are actively involved in that process, and the hope is that we can find a way to save some of the cost that's being projected. But right now, the prudent thing to do is to put in place the authorization for the full 19, which the DP in fact can require the town to do under the consent order, and move forward and be prepared for what comes. So that's my, the background on the request of the $5 million. I guess I'm happy to take questions on specifics of any of this. I don't know if there are other
Questions?
things.
Christie?
Hi, George. Was wondering if you could define stockpiles of material that were left behind. Or not
Okay.
accounted for.
Sure. There are actually 5 specific stockpiles that we've identified. And if you look at the landfill, I don't have a graphic ready to share, but if you look at the landfill, there's one to the northeast, there are 2 to the west, one to the south, and one to the very south of the site. Some of them involve material that was removed from the landfill during the landfill mining process, which was the 10-year process that occurred between 2009 and 2019. And some of these stockpiles are quite large. The hope is that we could screen the material and use it for sand in parts of the landfill closure. And if we could use that screen material, instead of saying it's going to save the town a lot of money, it could be run to millions of dollars. So the town has actually begun the process of applying to the Mass DEP for authorization to do that. The question is, to what extent are there PFAS in those materials? Have they been assessed? And to what extent would that change the department's direction and how that material would need to be used in the closure? There are also some materials that are residuals from the closure process. And the question is, do they need to be within the mound, within the clock, or can they be used above the cap to change grades and contours of the design? If they're within the cap, you need a bigger cap, it costs more. If they're above the cap, you don't need other materials and you have a smaller volume to close, it costs less. This is could be a multi-million-dollar question again. So again, there's some pretty big swings depending on what the DEP rules. There's one other pile that doesn't fall into that into the same category as those other four. About 20,000 cubic yards of compost that was created, I think between 2016 or so and 2021. And that was compost that was created at a time when biosolids from the Surfside facility were still going into the compost. So they are suspected to have PFAS in them and are likely to be needed to be included under the cap rather than staying where they are, which is at the southeast corner of the landfill site. There may be reason and it may be prudent to move that material into the closure anyway, but DEP has not ruled on what the standards are for deciding whether that material needs to be removed or not. I'm bringing this up because there are other items relating to that particular stockpile, but it is one of the stockpiles under consideration. Does it have PFAS or not? Can it be used above the cap, or does it need to be included below it?
Understood. Got it. Richard, I have one more question.
Go ahead.
So George, this 5 million would sort of bring us up to the number we're sort of targeting. So if the town is would be financially ready after DEP makes some decisions, do you know if we have the appropriate contractors commitments to assist in a timely fashion?
Okay, we're going to have to do. Okay, so I appreciate these answers are longer than might be optimal, but it is a lot of money. So I make longer answers for more money is probably appropriate. So at this point, we have a design for the closure that was proposed in 2009. We need to update the design before you go out for bids and get a contractor response. So we've made contact. So we know who would bid on it. There aren't that many people who do this work in Massachusetts and not that many who do it on Nantucket. And when the town bid it out for cell 3 construction, it would be a similar contract. So we have some bid experience with this. But that being said, it's been a few years. So no, we don't have a contractor selected. We would have to complete the design and then do the procurement after the design has been approved and ready to put out.
Thank you.
Brian?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just one follow on to George's point. At this point, because we believe the cost is 19 million, we wouldn't even be able to select a contractor because we couldn't enter into an agreement with them.
Yeah.
Because we don't have the funding necessary to support the contract if it were to exceed the 14 million that we have authorized. So
I see.
we
I see. Yeah.
most likely what we would do is if we had to bid this out, we would start bidding it right before town meeting so that we would have the number, and when town meeting approved it, we'd be able to execute the
Got it.
contract.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. Makes sense.
Any other questions? I have just one, George. Does the impending renewal of the contract for the operation of the facility is there any impact on that as it relates to this project?
Well, it's a very interesting question. So I'm going to say that as regarding the full capping and closure probably not, because Waste Options might argue that they have some rights to do some things, but basically the town has to put it out to bid and they'd have to win a bid. However, Waste Options does have some obligations to maintain the site independent of any particular closure. And to the extent that we could get Waste Options to do some of the preliminary material relocation before the full closure occurs, that may be advantageous. And in particular, the 20,000 cubic yard pile that was stockpiled at the corner, at the southeast corner of the site, it might be advantageous to have that moved onto the landfill cap if the town believes that it's likely to be needed to be enclosed in the closed area. Why not have Waste Options move the material now and then, you know, do the under, it might be advantageous while they're mobilized, as opposed to paying somebody else to mobilize and do it, which would cost more later. So there, you know, so there are a couple things like that that are, you know, not the full 19 million, but maybe a piece of it that's significant, where there might be some savings for the town to do a piece of the rearrangement of material in advance of the full closure. And that's one of the things we're working with Westman and Sampson to identify.
Yeah, it's interesting topic.
Anything else from anyone? Is George prepared to address any of these other projects?
I would suspect that George would be able to talk about the third baler. The second scale, we could probably talk about, but George could certainly weigh in on. And I think that George has also been involved in the stormwater improvement discussions. Is that correct, George?
Yeah, I think the MRF improvements as well, because that's the backbreaker. You know,
Is that that's the third baler, right, George?
well, actually, it's the second one on the list. It's yeah, it's listed as third baler.
Correct. So George, yes, he probably
Right.
everything but the vehicle.
Okay, George, go ahead. We're
Okay.
gonna start with the third baler.
The third baler. Okay, so let me take a step back. The MRF was built in the 1990s and it's gone 25 years more plus without any significant improvements, which means it shouldn't be a surprise that improvements are overdue. And when we look at the third baler, there are actually a couple of issues related. And again, I can put this in the context of a master plan for the MRF, because that's the best way to understand what's going on, rather than just pitch a third baler because we need one, because the existing balers are all at capacity, especially over the summer, which is true. But why a third baler? I guess the real question is, stepping back, the town right now is not recycling paper other than cardboard. The paper is going into the compost. A lot of that paper, if it's coming out of food service organizations, or if it's packaging, or if it's pizza boxes or other things that are coated papers with various coatings on them, are known to contain PFAS, which ends up in the compost, which is a bigger problem. One way to address that is to recycle the paper, which means collecting it, processing it, baling it, and sending it off. Right now, the town does not have the capacity to bale that paper. And so that would be the primary use of a third baler, would be to bale paper. And so what you're seeing is a number, you know, that is based, I believe, on a quote that Waste Options got for baling from paper. We have not done the procurement yet. We've gotten some preliminary quotes. One of the questions is, if you look at the master plan for the MRF, there are other things that are going to need to be done. There's some existing authorizations to improve, to add what's called a debagger, so that waste coming in, which right now it's in bags, you got to open the bags before you can separate the plastic from the paper from whatever else might be recycling. You can't do it closed bags because things are coming mixed. Right now, that's done by hand. That takes a lot of labor. The labor means the labor opening bags can't be used to sort the materials downstream, because you can't sort it until you open it. And as a result, that's the bottleneck in the whole process for the MRF over the summer. There's not enough capacity. The MRF is operating at capacity, and recyclables back up. That presents a potential odor problem. it's a potential that those recyclables might have to be bypassed to the mainland instead of being recycled, which will cost the town more because there isn't capacity over the summer to deal with it. And if you can't store it without smelling, you're gonna have to move it. One way to solve that problem is to get an automatic debagger, which releases labor to do more sorting with the same people. And so for a little bit of capital, you've increased capacity and avoided some of the risk of bypassing waste that ought to be recycled becomes waste to be paying for. So again.
George, can I just interrupt? Is the debagger in,
That was approved at last year's town meeting.
It was approved in last year's town meeting. So there's money from that actually at a couple past meetings, 2020 and 2022. There's a question about whether the authorizations are could be enough to do what needs to be done when you look at the whole master plan of sorting, upgrading, addressing, and we're going through right now the process of trying to figure out what that's going to be cost, what the priorities are. So I'm just going to tell you what I think, and the chips will fall where they may. I mean, a third baler is important, but I think a debagger is more important. And if there was some flexibility with the MRF improvements authorization, it might be helpful because it might be at some point going forward, we might need some of that authorization for the debagger project rather than the third baler. I can't tell you now whether that is case, and we hope to be further down the path in the next few months before town meeting. But I'm just putting this out there because that's the way it is, and you ought to know about it. I think that also goes to, well, is there anything else that falls into that? No, I think that's, so yes, a third baler right now is needed for when we recycle paper, but we might not recycle paper until the sorting station is improved, and that might require the bag breaker first.
have we appropriated enough money for the debagger?
That's actually a very good question. We recently had a meeting about a multitude of things with waste options. One of the things that came out of that is George and I are going to sit down with Nathan from Waste Options and go through the list of appropriations and prioritize them and identify what we need to do for them. So as we sit here today, I can't tell you yes or no. I know that the quote was given that we used as the basis was an estimate that was received before we came before you last year. I can't tell you that it's solid at this point. That's the best I can give you for right now.
Okay. Any questions on debagger or Murph? Jill?
I just want to, what percentage of our recycling goes off island now, George?
Okay, so everything that's coming in the bags, okay, the plastic bags right now. Okay, let me back up and parse the question a little bit carefully. Okay, so everything that's coming in as metal or mixed plastic in a plastic bag is getting debagged. The metal is going off island for recycling. The plastics, mixed plastics, are going off island for recycling. The bag material itself right now is going off island for disposal. Okay, and the glass is being used on island for various applications at the landfill. It processes road base or pipe, bedding and stuff like that, construction application. So just about everything that's being recycled, unless somebody's throwing something that's not recyclable, if somebody puts trash in with their recyclable, somebody else is going to pick it out and not send it off island for recycling. But the trash that's coming in is being recycled right now off island.
I guess that doesn't, I guess I just don't understand that, sorry.
Okay, when you put material in, there are two ways recyclables get to 180 Connecticut Road. Either you self-deliver and put it in down the chute. Okay, that stuff all gets recycled. Okay, it's being sent off island to recycling centers on the mainland, who then send it through the process. Or you can hire a hauler who brings it to the MRF, And then it's in a bag because the haulers are picking things up in bags, right? With me so far?
I am. Thank
Okay,
you.
well, they'll back up the truck and the MRF, they'll throw the bags onto the floor. Somebody's got to open all those bags. And then
Right.
the stuff in the bags that's recyclable gets recycled off island. But we're dealing with real people, which means some of those bags are going to have stuff that shouldn't be in them. And some of the bags are going to end up in the wrong place, and that stuff gets disposed.
But it sounds like even if the things that are mixed together, they're still getting recycled. Somewhere.
Yes, I think one of the problems of Nantucket is, and it's a classic problem, as an island, we're only doing what, 2,000 tons of recycling a year at our recycling center. You go to the mainland and they tend to do 100 to 150,000 tons per year minimum. We don't have their economies of scale, so we can't do all the processing that a bigger facility would. We have to send it to somebody else who recycles it for us.
So do we know what percentage of that is sent off island?
Yeah, I mean, well, when it goes off island, it's going either to ABC Disposal in Rochester or to the Mansfield Recycling. In Mansfield, that stuff pretty much all gets recycled, but, you know, a couple of percent residual. So very high percentage. I can't give you that.
Do we know how many
Yeah,
tons? So you do that on tons, right?
Yes, Yeah.
So we know how many tons of trash we get that's recycled. And then we know how many we send off island.
yes.
Do you know that number?
Okay, so when you say trash that's coming in separately, the MSW is typically about 13,000 tons a year at this point. The recycling is about 2,000 tons per year.
2,000?
Okay,
George, did you say 2 or 3,000?
I don't have that number directly in front of me. It's been in the range of 2,000 tons per year, just looking what's sorted and sent off separately. I can look
Right.
that up if you like.
That'd be great. That always sort of helps me.
Okay,
I mean, if you think these, getting these things is gonna improve keeping our recycling here, that's what I'm getting at.
yep, absolutely. Well, again, on Nantucket, we're recycling the glass because we can use it for construction application. The plastic and the metal could go already back to somebody who can recycle it as a new plastic and metal. That's going to happen on the mainland.
All the plastic,
Yeah,
that's what I thought.
okay. We are looking into on a pilot basis, doing some plastic recycling on Nantucket, but that's still emerging technology and looking into pilot phases, but it's not here yet.
Christie?
Thanks, George.
I'm sorry.
George, this third baler as well as the debagger, is this all rely on the public doing their part in separating stuff previously? Or, I mean, is there more education that needs to go out to the public on what's what, considering new considerations for PFAS and stuff like that?
So my answer is, first of all, yes, there's always a need for more education of the public, but generally the people who are separating do a pretty good job of what goes through into the chutes. But that's about 25 or 30% of the total material. 65 to 70 comes in with private haulers and bags. And so there, the separating is done by workers at the MRF itself.
Got it. Okay.
George,
I almost, really just to follow up, Richard.
Sure.
I almost think that there should be an annual re-up on educating and reminding people, because whether it's renters or people that are coming into the community that don't know what the regulations are, there really should be more of an effort to remind people what we need to do. Thank you. That's it.
George, I just have a question about the new textile recycling regulations. And how are we handling that?
Okay, so there are a couple of, so the residential material, you're talking about the waistband that went into effect by the Mass DP on November 1st, so it's really topical. When you look at what DP is recommending, for starters, as long as there are drop-off options for any clothing or textile type options for residents, and you're providing the opportunity to recycle, that's going to meet the standard of the early phase of the program. So anybody who brings in material can either put it through a separate, basically a separate container, and it gets shipped to the mainland to, I think, there are a few firms, either Goodwill or CDMK or a few other firms that have textile recycling operations, and they will typically do the sorting there of what's usable clothing and what needs to be returned to industrial washing costs. There's a plant in Methuen that will take sorted material for that. So there's a in-region facility to do that. But that's done off, again, on the mainland at a much larger scale than Nantucket would do. Nantucket also has the take it or leave it to handle some items. The issue comes up when you have items like large carpets or rugs that if they're left at take it or leave it, nobody wants to take, or things that are damaged or contaminated. And again, the waistband from the Mass DP has an exclusion for contaminated items or items with bodily fluids, etc. But when you get into things that are just dirty and need to be handled and are dirty enough such that the textile recyclers won't take them, then you get into an area that's a bit of a problem. It is a new regulation. There's going to be some evolution in the first few months as we go forward and figure out how to handle every subcategory of textiles. But I think the town is pretty well positioned at this point to provide drop-off opportunities for people who bring them in and to handle other items, and then we'll just have to narrow in on this subcategory of items that are known to be a little bit more difficult.
Okay, any other questions on this? Okay, moving on to the second scale.
Okay. I think this is a pretty straightforward issue of congestion, especially during some summer peak time. When haulers bring material in, that scale is shared not only by the haulers bringing in waste, household waste, but by haulers bringing in construction and demolition debris. When a truck, and not only trucks coming in, when a truck leaves the site, it also has to get weighed on the way out if it's taking product to the mainland. So you've got a lot of trucks with a lot of different categories going over one scale. If you have a problem with the scale, or if everybody's lined up, you're going to have a queue, you're going to have a backup. And the way to do that is to have a second scale. So you're ready, if first scale is out of service, you've got a second one, and it'll alleviate the queuing issue when you're at peak period. Again, I think this has been suggested before. It's been a want for some time. If you were setting priorities, you might put something else ahead of it. But on the other hand, it's a real need. There's a real congestion problem. And, I see Stephen is on, and he can tell you firsthand about going to the site and playing policeman, trying to, direct traffic when there's a big queue or there's a dispute over who's coming in what order and who gets weighed first. Or when the traffic is creating access problems for the recycling center.
Any questions on this, Christy?
George, this number seems a little low for a full scale setup. What are we getting for this? And is there any other, is this just a one phase thing or?
A scale itself is, I mean, Stephen might have to answer that because I'm not as familiar. I know that it is based on a quote for installation of the scale and software and running conduit to the, so you can get electric power to the scale house, etc. And I don't know to what extent there needs to be some widening of the road or road improvements so that the scale can be placed where it would be placed. I'm just not as familiar with this particular proposal as somebody else might be. So I don't know if Stephen's on.
Stephen is on, so maybe he could add some more
He's on mute
clarity.
if he's trying to talk.
Stephen, you're on mute. If you want to unmute yourself.
Maybe stepped out.
Yeah. Please step down.
Jill, you had a question.
Do you have one person that mans the scale?
There's one waste options employee in the scale house.
And then can they man two at a time?
Most likely they would have to figure out the staffing to have the second one in operation during the busy periods.
Right, so mostly
do
in
it,
the summer.
yes.
have a
Yes,
summer.
summer, yeah,
That wouldn't alleviate traffic if you still have the one person doing it.
no, that is correct.
Yeah,
So you gotta have.
you gotta have two, you gotta.
Yeah.
Yeah, though it is worth noting that typically cross trains, so you would have somebody who does something else at other times and then go into the scale house at peak periods when it's needed.
And then if, one more question, if everything that comes in is weighed. And then when it leaves, it's weighed, right?
Mhm.
And then when it goes off island, it's weighed again at its receiving site, right?
Yes. Yes,
Is there ever like, a difference in the weight?
there is always a difference in the way, and this is just the nature of the business. I mean, if it rains during the truck ride in an open
Right.
deck, you're gonna get water. Water's gonna evaporate. Their scale might not be calibrated the same way yours is. This is just one of the things that gets solid waste people pulling their hair out. You just gotta work around it and live with it. You know,
Right,
you pay on delivery, you weigh when it leaves, you hope to keep them honest. And this is just life in the world of solid waste.
Christie,
Well, from what I understand, not everyone weighs out because you have your DPW sticker,
yeah,
which is your vehicle. So some vehicles have already been weighed in and are logged in. So when they go through the scale, they take the difference of whatever the weight of your truck is now compared to what the empty weight is. Supposedly it was the empty weight. I think there's a lot of gray area there, and I actually personally think every vehicle should weigh out, because then you're getting a true measure of what
what was
is
weighed in?
going in.
Yeah.
So that would be my way to do it. I think there's a lot of gray area, and I think we're probably losing some revenue this
So are you
way.
suggesting a third scale?
So I'm going to third scale for next year.
Well,
Why would you not leave everything?
Leave what?
Well, you can imagine that when there's congestion, then somebody's more likely to be bypassed and go on the basis of the tear weight than an actual. So, I mean,
Some people
your
drive
point's well
through
taken.
it. They match it up and then they.
Yeah,
just
but-
drive.
Oh, I see.
Peter?
Well, I mean, Chrissy, I was gonna say, if somebody goes through and doesn't dump everything, then they're actually getting charged more than what they're leaving. So wouldn't that be more revenue than would otherwise be accrued? I mean, you'd imagine if you're gonna pay for the difference between your GVW and what you weigh going in, you're gonna want to get rid of everything.
Correct. Why wouldn't you, aren't you going to the dump to get rid of everything?
Well, right, so I don't see a situation where someone's gonna be able to dump more than they're paying for. Unless they're, unloading a part of their engine that was part of the GVW, you know what I'm saying?
Well,
Yeah, it's just not a true measure of what you're bringing in from an empty weight, but an empty weight could also have 3 people in it, as opposed to 1. So this,
Well, yeah.
what I'm saying is there's just this gray area. Yeah, you could take any scenario. That's why I say it's gray. It goes either way.
Kind
So-
of, but I mean, if it's an empty truck that's, has a GVW that's classified and legitimate, I don't see how somebody's gonna add more weight when they go in on the scale and then not pay for all of it.
Well, it depends what that initial weight was. So if someone drives in with 4 employees and, a cinder block in the back, and they say, I'd like to weigh my vehicle in, that's the weight that is registered for that vehicle.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, typically I thought that they were all cataloged like manufacturer GVW
No,
when they
no.
leave. Got it.
No,
Got it.
No.
Got it. Got it.
All right, have we talked
So
this
we
one
want
to
some
death?
really fit employees. That's what we need.
listen, I just say that because I've always had a problem with it.
George, we'll need to spend money on these improvements, whether or not, or irrespective of what happens with the renegotiation coming up in 2025, is it?
yeah, I mean, it's a separate question. And really, you know, it's the question of, is the value of relieving congestion and maybe having more capacity to do way outs worth the cost of the improvement?
Okay. Anything else? George, can you speak on the stormwater improvements?
Okay, if you look at the southeast portion of the site, there's there's a large area south
Do you
of
have
the.
that?
George,
One
hold on
second.
for a minute.
Stu,
We're
do you
gonna
have
try
a
to
map
screen
of
share.
this? Do we have a map and supplemental documents for this?
Let me take a look. Hang on.
Thank
Keep
you.
talking and I'll look.
you know,
Okay, go ahead, George.
The other thing you do is go on the town website and look at the DPW map up there, or the site map up there. But there's a portion of the site where there's a lot of waste handling that is occurring. Basically, it looks like windrows and piles of dirt. It's where after the material comes out of the compost, it is placed in windrows for additional what's called curing, which takes 6 months, sometimes longer. And then you also have yard waste being composted and moved around on that site. And sometimes you have yard waste and the composter output being blended. There are a number of other materials. It's just a couple of acres where materials are moved around. That site is not paved. Okay, and there are a couple of concerns about it not being paved. What is happening with stormwater or running off partially composted material? Is it carrying nitrogen over the property line towards Long Pond? There have been a number of concerns expressed over the years about this. And frankly, when you use a bulldozer or an excavator and move material around, you're moving the ground as well as the material, and it's not the most efficient way to do it. So the question is, how much of this could you pave? And how would that improve your operation? That's the basic big picture. If you're going to pave it and with something that's impervious, then the water is going to run off. So you're going to have to collect the water and make sure that nothing that's running off is creating a problem. So we're looking at money for some paving and then collecting stormwater, either catch basins or something, to make sure that particles aren't running off the stormwater, aren't running off the site. There are some longer term issues here as well. Remember that 20,000 cubic yard pile? Okay. Oh, there's okay. If you could blow this up a little bit. If you look right here, you see where you see the pond too. And that's, again, this is in the southeast of the landfill. I think the transfer station is shown all the way at the right in pink, and then you see some piles. This is from a report that was actually put out by the Land Council. If you look at the very bottom, you see it says NW8. That's a monitoring well on the southern property line. That's where that 20,000 cubic yards of compost is sitting that may have elevated PFAS in it. What it may make sense is as a package to move that 20,000 cubic yards to the landfill and pave the area under it. And then you're doing a couple of things. You're moving a pile of material that might have PFAS in it away from the property line, which is probably a good idea. And then you're freeing up some space where material can be moved without digging up the ground underneath it and where the stormwater might be controlled. Now, there was a prior, I believe there was a prior appropriation in the 22 town meeting of $600,000 toward this task. That would cover probably an acre or two of this. And we'd like to do the whole area over a couple of years. So this would be an additional authorization to move towards that goal. So I think that that's the general use of the funds and why we need to do it. I think, you know, and there are longer term and short term site planning considerations as well. So maybe I'll stop there and take questions.
Questions?
I do.
Christie,
I'm just curious about all this infrastructure. When a year and a half out, we should know what our next steps are. You know,
Well-
with whatever our plan is for the facility.
Okay, so a couple of things. So whatever the plans are, I mean, I think one thing is established, the more material you can manage on site rather than sending to the mainland, the less you're going to spend. And right now, the town, believe it or not, is getting 12 to 13,000 tons per year of leaf and yard waste in, and all that is managed in that area. So you're going to keep managing.
13,000 tons.
I mean, the only question is how much flexibility do you have to manage multiple streams of waste in that area? And if you had more paved area, you move the pile, you'd have more flexibility.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I tried to.
Is the yard waste compostable?
no, they're worried about PFAS now. Being in the
We've
yard.
got a lot more hazardous materials at the dump than just PFAS. That's
I know, I agree.
99% of every human being's bloodstream. I mean, this is not the most dangerous thing at the dump.
But yeah,
But that does, but it sounds like you are getting regulated for that by the state,
exactly.
so I understand
Yeah,
why you're bringing it up.
right. I mean, I PFAS regulation is very controversial, and I tend to agree with your statement. But it may not be up to us, and maybe something that the tells the town to do, or tells all towns to do. And I think there is a lot of concern about PFAS material migration off the site. So even if there's a better way to contain it on the site, that would address the concern whether or not it rises to a public health concern. And I think paving is part of a plan to move in that direction anyway. And again, we are sitting here not knowing what the DEP will require. So some of this is anticipating what the requirements might be and what the capital needs might be in advance of knowing if it's actually going to materialize.
Christie,
George, is this stormwater improvement in conjunction with the new soon to be enterprise fund of stormwater? Or is this totally separate?
Separate.
It's separate, huh?
Separate.
Yeah. That's separate.
Okay,
The stormwater enterprise fund that we've discussed and most likely will propose along with the capital is really island-wide, not intended to be part of this. These are two separate
yeah, okay,
projects.
okay.
all right, thank you, George.
Okay.
This has been very interesting. Thank you for your report.
Okay.
Steve Arsenault, I see that you're there. Do you want to add anything to what's already been said? And we also have the request for a new staff vehicle.
Yes, no, George is a godsend, and the town is very fortunate to have him. So no, I don't have anything to add to what he has. The vehicle request is for a solid waste manager and staff. Right now, that position is vacant, but we are actively hiring for that position, and that person would need a vehicle to be able to maneuver and get around. So that's what that is there for. It's not meant for any type of construction or heavy work. It's basically a personnel vehicle so they can assist with our various initiatives and supervising the various jobs, working with waste options, with hazardous compliance, going out and doing surveys. So it's just a basic vehicle.
Any questions?
Yeah.
Christie,
Is this a take-home vehicle? Or is it stay on property?
No. This is stay on property. I know that we have rules in place that if you do take a vehicle home, you have to we have to make a declaration to finance that we are doing that with the vehicle. I have it in my plans for it to be stay on campus vehicle.
Anyone else? Barry?
Yeah, please. Just, I want to digress for a minute, and kind of go back to your second scale thing. Has there ever been any thought about using a barcoded sticker system for every vehicle that goes through the DPW in terms of both data gathering and just having basic information available? Because I know when I went to the recycling part, out in the back with some yard waste, it was like, what's the gross weight of your vehicle? Remember that for the future. And again, a lot of it seems like there's a lot of manual data input for this as well too. And I just wanted to see if there was any thought about how, you know, if you're talking about reducing traffic as well, trying to streamline that process of in and out may be a lot easier just using a barcoded system. And if you used it at the front gate, you might even get some better data about what's going on. So I just wanted to throw that out to you on a larger basis about what that would begin to look like, and see if there's ways to kind of, you know, make things a little more efficient in terms of that. Any thoughts, gentlemen? Or is that too new for the moment?
We have our a system in place for contractors where they can and it's not strictly for contractors actually, where they can purchase a sticker, they can weigh their vehicle, and they get a sticker, and so when they come up, they come up with the load, and that's put against the weight. But a lot of people don't want to do that, so I have to look at how we are. I have to look at our process to see how we're passively requiring it right now. I don't think we're mandating it for the entire community. So that we can look at that though. I think you're right. That'll make it a lot more efficient. Last year, I ended up having to be a traffic cop for a few hours. It was great to meet a lot of people, but I'm sure everyone had better things to do other than shake hands with me. So yes, we will look at that process. I think that's a great idea.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, I think that is it for
Can you touch on the composter in the transfer station?
Yeah, probably George or I could touch on those,
Okay.
most likely.
Okay.
Composter is in at $1 million because George, correct me if I'm wrong, but that is the buyout figure in the current waste options agreement that we have at the end of life.
Yes.
The purchase of the transfer station is listed as $1 because their waste options actually constructed that building on the facility, on the site. And I think the select board in a meeting has indicated that it would be their goal that the town potentially own all of the building structures in the entire site. And in order to do that, we would have to negotiate a purchase from waste options for that particular structure that currently exists. We internally are in the process of discussing what that process would look like to be able to acquire it. We know that there's going to be a number ultimately that we will have to go to town meeting for to authorize if we decide to take that step.
Okay.
It's in as a dollar as a placeholder because we haven't ultimately even begun negotiations with waste options on that. And B, haven't settled on a final agreement. So the $1 is really a placeholder, knowing that it's going to be an ask. It will have to be done at the 2024 annual town meeting to meet the requirements of the end of the contract in what is it, George, November of 2025?
Yeah, end of November 2025.
So we'll have to have that ready to go.
Can I follow up, Richard?
Yes, please.
Is the plan for the town and waste options to have two independent assessments?
The town will undertake and has already begun the process of undertaking an appraisal with a firm that has the capabilities to do that.
Yeah.
And from that, we will review it and then make our decision on how to proceed in the negotiations of that. My suspicion or my expectation is that Waste Options would want to see that and make comments and most likely would undertake their own evaluation that they would probably share with us to review and come to a final agreement.
Understood. Makes sense.
Hopefully, if we can.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not gonna sit
yeah,
here and
yeah.
presume that we're gonna be able to. I think the agreement is generally that if we're gonna move into a new contract in 2025, we want the entire structure to be under the town's control.
And the
Sure.
equipment
And
inside.
the equipment inside to be under the town's control to the extent possible.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, good.
Right,
Gentlemen,
George.
if you would, I just wanted to apologize for coming in late and being on and off. I had a few things that needed immediate attention, but I meant no disrespect to the committee. Thank you.
Richard, can I just do one follow-up? Sorry.
One more follow-up.
Sorry, Stephen,
Kristen.
if you know, the second scale, does this price include install and calibration and everything like that? As far as you know?
Install and I'd have to relook at that. We priced that, okay, I don't remember the last time we got that quote. I'd have to, I want to look at that again because I'm sure it cost may have changed a bit as far as installation and bringing someone on.
Yeah.
So but that should be basically the price for the entire process for the scale.
Okay, just seems, it seems low to me, but I just want to make sure we don't see another $500,000 for something.
Exactly. I think it may be off a little bit because of time, but that's pretty much it.
Okay. I'll hold you to it.
All right, once again, thanks, Stephen. Thanks, George. And we'll move on to the rest of our agenda.
Excuse me.
We'll bypass the discussion of a new date and time. I think that's a placeholder. Change of meeting venue, I think that's a placeholder. Report writing work group
I think,
updates.
I think Sue may have some updates from Bill with respect to the footnotes and the template, correct, Sue?
Yeah, just to let you guys know, I heard from Bill earlier in the week. He is just about, yes, I'm sorry, from Plum. He's just about done with formatting and getting ready the Appendix A for your final recommendation report. And Appendix B should be done by the end of the week. I'm meeting with him on Monday morning to look everything over and get a final version from him. He's going to show it to me on the screen, and he's still having some issues with the formatting on the footnotes, but we're going to go over that on Monday.
So will we be able to send them a view of how those reports look after Monday possibly?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, green sheet committee reports, anything from anybody? Okay, good of the order, anything? The date of our next meeting is next Thursday, November 10th at 10 a.m. What are we discussing?
Next week is a flex meeting. So we were going to be bringing the airport back to
Okay.
continue the discussion on the
see.
Belvedere development. And I believe I had emailed Stephen, Michelle from the nursing home. I'm so sorry, our island home. She had an increase to her request for the van of about 20,000. So I have kind of put her on standby that you may want her to come before you for that increase. I did put the new quote in Plum, so you can take a look at it.
Denying.
Okay.
You're tough.
And if there's
All
anybody
right.
else that you would like back, we
We
can.
get a lot of scales and add more employees.
Okay,
Come on, man.
I've lost
Making it
control
hard
of this meeting.
No, I don't think you
But
have. I think
we're
you did a
at
great job.
We're at the moment where I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So move, sir.
Thank you, Barry.
Second.
On your motion, Barry?
Pardon?
On your motion,
Yes.
Aye.
Christie,
Yes.
Jill,
Uh,
Pete,
Approved.
I'm an aye also. Thank you guys for putting up with me.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Hopefully next week we'll